There are places in this world where silence speaks louder than words, where the very walls seem to breathe and the shadows remember. These are not merely ruins of stone and dust, they are temples. Not buildings, but beings. And in every true temple there is a pattern, a journey, a path. From the moment one steps across the threshold of a sacred site, something begins. It is not a walk across space, it is a movement inward. The structure itself guides the initiate, layer by layer, deeper into mystery. The ancients did not build temples the way we build churches, halls, or monuments today. They were not places of performance or even of passive worship. They were mirrors of the cosmos and of the human soul. Every chamber, every wall, every column told a story not with words, but with vibration, geometry, and silence. At the outermost layer there was the world, the mundane, the known, the place where the uninitiated gathered. Here, incense may burn and hymns may rise, but it is only the surface. Beyond this deeper lie the antechambers, each more restricted, each more sacred. This architectural descent is not accidental. It is a map, a living scroll etched in stone. The outer court reflects the body, the middle halls, the mind, and the innermost chamber, the sanctuary. No foot may enter without permission, is the spirit, the spark of the divine within. In Egypt, it was the naos, a sealed room containing the statue of the god, often unseen even by priests. In Jerusalem, it was the Holy of Holies, a space where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year. In Hindu temples, it is the Garbha Griha, the womb chamber, the core of stillness, housing the deity. And in each, there is an almost identical message. The deeper you go, the more sacred it becomes, until finally, you stand before the great silence. But what is it that makes this inner chamber sacred? Why were entire civilizations so devoted to keeping it hidden, sealed, protected? Because the sanctuary is not just a place, it is a threshold, a veil, a liminal zone between worlds, between the seen and the unseen, the temporal and the eternal. To enter it without preparation is not just forbidden, it is dangerous, like gazing directly at the sun, like touching raw electricity. Only those who have been prepared, purified, and reborn may pass through its invisible gate. The ancients knew something we have forgotten, that space itself can be alive, that form can carry intention, that architecture, aligned with stars and frequencies, can unlock something buried not in the earth, but in us. The temple is not a structure. It is a being, a body, a teacher, and at its heart lies not a god made of stone, but a door. Though the tongues of ancient peoples differed, and their gods wore many names, one mystery echoed through their temples like a silent refrain: the presence of the forbidden room, a space hidden, sealed, and veiled from the eyes of the many. It existed in Egypt, where the innermost chamber of the temple was called the naos, a small shrine, often made of granite, locked tight, housing the sacred statue of the god. No sunlight touched this room. No common voice echoed in its walls. Even the priests would approach it with trembling hands and whispered prayers. Only the high priest, initiated and purified, could enter, and only during sacred rites. The god was not to be seen, only felt. In ancient Mesopotamia, the ziggurats rose like mountains of brick and purpose. At the summit of these step temples was not merely a viewpoint, but the Etemenanki, a dwelling place of the gods. Not all could ascend, and even fewer were permitted within its sealed sanctum. It was here, they believed, that the divine descended not symbolically, but physically. The room, though empty to the eye, was full of presence. In the Jewish tradition, the Holy of Holies Kodesh HaKodashim stood at the very heart of the temple in Jerusalem. No one, not even the king, could enter, save for the high priest, and only once per year on Yom Kippur. And even then, he entered with offerings and smoke so that his eyes might be shielded from the raw glory within. Here stood the Ark of the Covenant, or at least the memory of it, the space between the cherubim where the unseen spoke. India too held this pattern. In the ancient Dravidian and Vedic temples, the Garbhagriha, the womb chamber, was the holiest of holies. A small, dark room deep within stone walls where the deity resided in murti form. Entry was limited. Often, even devotees could not enter. They could only glimpse the deity from the threshold, beyond the gate, through layers of sacred architecture. The room was not just holy, it was alive. This pattern repeats across continents. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan and Aztec temples were built upon platforms hiding narrow corridors and hidden chambers where sacred objects were sealed. In Cambodia, the central towers of Angkor Wat, rising like lotus petals toward the heavens, held inner sanctuaries meant only for the initiated. Even in ancient China, within Taoist monasteries and imperial tombs, the innermost halls were reserved for the celestial rites. Rites never spoken aloud. What connects them all? Not geography, not language, but reverence for the hidden. The sanctum was never about exclusion for power's sake. It was about preservation. The recognition that certain spaces and the forces they invite must be approached slowly, respectfully, and with inner readiness. That to encounter the sacred without transformation is to invite destruction or madness. Across these civilizations, the restricted space was not meant to be seen, it was meant to be experienced, and to experience it was to cross a line, not just of walls, but of reality. There is a reason every true temple ends in a room with no windows, a reason the deepest knowledge is always protected by silence, and a reason we still dream of hidden doors behind stone walls. Because somewhere deep within us we remember, the forbidden room was never truly forbidden, it was waiting. What lies beyond the final door? Not a throne, not a treasure, but a silence so pure it becomes a presence. The inner chamber, hidden, sealed, forbidden, is more than architecture. It is symbol, and in every ancient tradition, it speaks a secret language. A language not of words, but of archetypes, primordial shapes and truths woven into the fabric of the human psyche. To step into the sanctum was to step into the womb, dark, enclosed, alive with potential. It is no accident that many of these innermost rooms were deliberately small, windowless, buried in the earth, or surrounded by thick stone. They were designed not for grandeur, but for gestation, for transformation. The initiate who entered did not emerge the same. Something was left behind. Something else was born. In esoteric traditions, this hidden space is the axis mundi, the world axis, the still point around which all movement turns. It is the center of the mandala, the heart of the labyrinth, the 0 point between dimensions. In myths, it becomes the sacred cave, the mountain peak, or the tree whose roots drink from the underworld and whose crown touches heaven. All are symbols of the same truth. The center is the bridge. But the center is always hidden, always protected, always veiled. The veil itself is no less symbolic. In ancient temples, curtains or doors separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the structure. But this veil was not simply a piece of cloth. It represented the boundary of perception, the final illusion that separates the material from the eternal, the ego from the soul. To cross that veil is not a physical act. It is a death of identity, of thought, of control. The mystics of every tradition agree to see the divine, one must first disappear. And so the inner chamber becomes a paradox. It is empty, yet full, dark, yet radiant, silent, yet vibrating with unseen music. Its emptiness is not absence, but potential, the pregnant void from which all creation emerges. Its darkness is the same darkness of the night sky where stars are born. Its silence is the womb of sound itself, before vibration has found shape. Some said gods lived in these rooms. Others said the gods never entered them at all because the room was the god. Still others understood something deeper, that the chamber was not a place but a mirror. Those who dared to enter did not find a statue. They found themselves, stripped of masks, confronted by essence. The inner sanctum is not meant to be explained. It is meant to be entered, and in that entry, the seeker becomes what he seeks. Temples were never only for the living. They were not built to gather crowds, but to part the veils between worlds. To the modern mind, a temple is a relic stone and echo, but to the ancients, it was an engine, a mechanism of alignment, a gate, not metaphorically, but literally. The deeper you study ancient temples, the clearer the pattern becomes. These were not passive places of worship. They were active technologies, designed to bridge dimensions. The orientation of the structure, the materials used, the geometry, the rituals performed, all were calculated to tune the temple like an instrument, to resonate with forces unseen. Egyptian temples, aligned to stars like Sirius and Orion's belt, were not just astronomically precise, they were cosmically interactive. The temple and the sky were in conversation. Light entered through narrow corridors only on specific days, solstices, equinoxes, sacred festivals, activating chambers with golden fire. In the ancient Hindu temples, certain shikaras, tower-like spires, were not ornamental. They were resonance funnels, channeling energy from above to below. Mantras were chanted in specific tones, designed to awaken both the structure and the soul. The vibration was not symbolic. It was literal, sound as key, unlocking the architecture of consciousness. Mayan temples, built atop power nodes of the earth, were constructed with precise ratios, creating acoustics that could carry whispers across vast courtyards. More than that, they were situated on ley lines, energetic arteries of the planet. These temples were not isolated. They were nodes in a planetary grid. But what were they connecting to? The ancient ones spoke of other realms, worlds, not up in the clouds, but layered around us, like veils of frequency. Just as radio waves fill the air yet remain invisible, so too did they believe in layers of existence, and the temple, properly attuned, could shift one's perception into these subtler domains. To enter the sanctuary was to step through more than stone. It was to cross into a liminal zone between sleep and wake, death and rebirth, matter and spirit. Rituals performed in the innermost sanctum were not theatrical. They were operations. Priests were not mere functionaries. They were technicians of the sacred. Every movement, chant, incense, and object played a role in opening the portal. In some traditions, it was said that the gods would descend, but only if the conditions were correct. Others said the initiate would ascend, but only after shedding all earthly residue. Still others believed there was no movement at all, only remembrance, a return to what had never left. These temples, then, were interfaces allowing the human to commune with the more than human. They were not about escape, but about expansion, the conscious blending of realms. And if this sounds strange to us today, perhaps it is not because the ancients were primitive, but because we have forgotten how to listen to stone, how to hear the silence that vibrates beneath sound, how to enter a space, not with eyes, but with soul. The temples are still here, The portals never closed, only our vision did. What if the temple was never built to house the gods, but to reveal the God within? Beyond the stone and geometry, beyond rituals and alignments, lies a deeper map, one not etched in walls, but in the psyche. The structure of the temple mirrors the structure of the self. It is not only a place to enter, but a process to undergo. The outer courtyard is the body, the world of action, sensation, and noise. It is the place where the senses rule, where the crowd gathers, where life unfolds externally. This is where most dwell on the surface. The middle chambers are the mind filled with echoes, symbols, reflection. These are the intellectual and emotional realms, the places of story, myth, and belief. Here we encounter teachings, rituals, and sacred texts. But still, this is not the center. To reach the sanctuary, the hidden, innermost chamber, one must go beyond the mind. One must pass the veil of identity, thought, and form. This is the realm of the spirit, pure awareness, silent and formless. It is the place within us that does not think, but knows. The journey through the temple becomes the journey through the self, and each threshold crossed, each narrowing hallway, each darkened room strips away another layer of illusion. In initiatory traditions, this movement inward was never symbolic. It was the essence of the path. To walk the sacred geometry was to reconfigure the soul. Every angle, every shadow, every echo was a challenge, a lesson, a mirror. And just as the inner chamber was hidden from sight, so too is our deepest self, often veiled by distraction, fear, ego, and time. The veil is not external. It is the mind's own resistance to silence. In the ancient mystery schools, Eleusis, Egypt, Vedic rites, the initiate would face a symbolic death before reaching the sacred center. This death was not of the body, but of the self-image. The personality, the name, the roles, all had to be surrendered. Only the one who had become nothing could enter the room that held everything. And what did they find there? Not a voice, not a god, but a vast stillness, and in that stillness, a reflection. The sanctuary was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be embodied. To reach it is not to arrive, but to remember that the sacred was never lost, only covered, and that the temple was always within. You carry it in your breath, in your silence, in the space behind your thoughts. The pilgrimage was never across lands, it was across layers of the self. There was a time when every stone whispered meaning, when space was not just designed, but consecrated, when buildings were not shelters but vessels. Temples once stood as bridges between the worlds. Their proportions encoded the cosmos. Their silence held instructions for the soul. But that time, the time of sacred architecture, has fallen. The fall was not sudden. It came slowly, like dust settling over forgotten altars. As empires shifted and priesthoods lost power, the sacred became symbolic and then ornamental. The knowledge once guarded by initiates was scattered, hidden, or erased. The blueprints of transcendence were replaced by blueprints of function. Space became utility. Geometry lost its soul. The temples were the first to go, then the shrines, then the very idea that space could transform the human spirit. In their place rose monuments to ego, power, and wealth, towers of commerce, fortresses of logic, built not to align with the stars, but to dominate skylines. Their measurements were not based on harmonic ratios, but on economy and scale. Beauty became surface, meaning became optional. And with this loss, something shifted in us. Without sacred spaces, we forgot how to center ourselves. Without inner sanctuaries, we lost the way inward. Without resonance, we became dissonant. The silence once found in stone halls gave way to noise. The stillness that opened the veil was buried beneath distraction. The reverence for hidden things was replaced with hunger for visibility. Some say the fall of temples was a historical inevitability, but others know it was not just a cultural shift, it was a spiritual amnesia. Even the architecture of our bodies has changed. We sit more, breathe less. We are surrounded by rectangles and sharp lights. We dwell in boxes, forgetting that the ancients built circles, domes, spirals, shapes that echoed the womb, the cosmos, the inner eye. What have we lost? Not just beauty, not just symmetry. We have lost the technology of transformation. The temple was a system, a sacred machine designed to awaken. Now we live in structures that lull us to sleep. But the memory is not gone. It lingers in ruins, in myths, in dreams. Sometimes, walking through an old cathedral or stone circle, you feel it, the echo. A presence just out of reach, a frequency trying to return. The temples are not angry. They are patient. They wait beneath cities, beneath our skins for us to remember, not how to build, but why we ever built at all. We no longer build temples of stone, but the hunger remains. Somewhere beneath the noise of modern life, beneath the weight of screens and schedules, there is a quiet ache for stillness, for mystery, for meaning. It is the call of the inner sanctuary, knocking softly from behind the ribcage. Though the outer temples have crumbled, the inner ones have not. They are not made of marble or gold, but of silence, breath, and intention. Today we rediscover the sacred not in ruins, but in rituals of presence. A candle in a dark room, a pause between thoughts, the closing of eyes, and the descent inward. Even now, we build sanctuaries, though we call them differently. A meditation space, a prayer corner, a place where phones are left behind and the air becomes still. These are not lesser temples. They are the return. The journey into the sanctuary does not require pilgrimage. It requires courage to sit with the unknown, to face the unfiltered self, to be alone, not in loneliness, but in wholeness. In ancient times, it took initiations and lifetimes. Today, it may begin with a single breath. The inner chamber opens not with keys, but with surrender. We rediscover sacred geometry, not just in structures, but in our own being, the spiral of the breath, the rhythm of the heart, the resonance of intention. The body itself becomes a temple, the mind a threshold, and the soul a flame within the sanctum. Modern seekers are remembering that true transformation does not require a priest or a pillar. It requires presence. And just as ancient temples were aligned to the stars, we must realign ourselves not to calendars and algorithms, but to cycles, symbols, and the silence between thoughts. To reclaim the inner sanctuary is to resist the erosion of meaning. It is to say, there is still something sacred in this world, and it lives within. We may not rebuild the great temples of the past, but we can become them. Every step inward is a step back toward the center. Every moment of reverence is a stone laid in the temple of the soul. And when the world forgets, we remember. Not as historians, but as keepers of the flame. There comes a moment in every journey where the map ends, where the questions fall silent, and the door stands before you. The hidden room, the sanctuary within the sanctuary, does not open with force. It opens with stillness. The ancients knew this, that beyond architecture, beyond rites and chants, beyond even the idea of God, there lies a space that cannot be entered by the self that seeks it. This is the paradox. You cannot enter the sacred, you must become it. The veil that separates you from the innermost chamber is not made of fabric, it is made of identity, thought, time, fear. And the key? The key is not an object, it is a state. Silence sharp enough to cut through illusion. Surrender deep enough to dissolve the name you wear. A stillness that does not suppress, but transcends. In ancient temples, initiates were led to the threshold blindfolded, not as punishment, but as preparation. For only in darkness does the inner light appear. Only in unknowing does true knowing begin. To enter the hidden room is to vanish, to pass beyond form, story, longing, to remember the part of you that was never born and cannot die. It is not an experience. It is the one who experiences, not an event in time, but the timeless behind all events. The temple, the path, the veil, they all dissolve, and what remains is you, not the personality, not the seeker, but the flame behind the flame. You realize then, the room was never locked, the veil was never real, and the key was always inside your hand.